the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, solving the crimes against humanity with a giant magnifying glass as big as the super blood wolf moon, zeroed in on that guy in the insane asylum who has somehow gotten his hands on the remote control for reality. Hey, stop that. No, we mean it. Don't press the purple button. No! Plus part 27 of the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen editor Tony Daniel. This time we talk with James L. Cambias about his science fiction novel Arkad's World. This is a book in the great tradition of Heinlein and Kipling, and there's a touch of Andre Norton Planetary Quest in there as well. It's really, really fun stuff. Jim Cambias has created a wonderful panoply of alien species and a very winning sort of Kim-like hero in Arkad. It's really good stuff, and Jim will tell us all about it. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's high fantasy novel, Son of the Black Sword. Now, here's the news. Hey, we've got new e-arcs available at Baen eBooks. You can find Baen eBooks at baen.com. Now, an e-arc is the sound your at-home corporate spying device, your Echo or whatever, gets caught playing EDM late at night and having a little rave with your toaster and refrigerator. Hey, you guys, you know that's going on, right? No, that's not what an e-arc is at all. An e-arc is an electronic advanced reading copy, which is the form of a book that we used to call the galleys. Now we offer it as an ebook for those who just want to get their favorite author's book ahead of time or try something new ahead of time. We are perfectly willing to sell that to you as long as you realize there might be a few typos in there we haven't caught yet. First up, we have 1637, The Polish Maelstrom e-arc by Eric Flint. Hey, it's a standalone novel by Eric. Strange weather. The Ottoman Empire has captured Vienna and is now laying siege to the Austrian government in exile established in the city of Linz. Both the United States of Europe and the Kingdom of Bohemia have come to Austria's assistance, but everyone knows this is going to be a long and brutal struggle. Meanwhile, Poland is coming to a boil. The Bohemians have sent an army into Poland with the goal of expanding King Albrecht Wallenstein's growing empire in Eastern Europe. When Grantville General Mike Stern sends the Hangman Regiment of his 3rd Division into the region, they find themselves at the center of a growing storm, one that threatens the continued existence of the United States of Europe. The maelstrom in Poland grows and grows and grows. Will it drag all its displaced Americans and their allies down with it? Also out in e-arc is A Witch in Time by William Mark Simmons. Something Wiccan this way comes. As founder of After Dark Investigations, half-vampire Christopher Chesty has seen his fair share of the seedy side of the supernatural world. Most recently, someone cut the gas line of his SUV and then ran over him with his semi-truck while he waited for a tow. But this is the 3rd time Chris has died. It's old hat at this point now for him. Awakened in a world he doesn't quite recognize, he'll have to use his wits to keep the supernatural world at bay. Interpol is interested in some of his associations with Vlad Dracul's grandson, better known as Dracula, and a trio of witches from Greek myth want him dead, and for good this time. Bad enough, but what's worse is that the IRS is looking into his tax returns. A Witch in Time e-arc by William Mark Simmons, and 1637, The Polish Maelstrom e-arc by Eric Flint are now available exclusively at Baen eBooks. Check them out, get them, and read them. Want to welcome James L. Cambias to the podcast. Hello, Jim. How's it going?
Pretty well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. James L. Cambias is a writer, game designer, and co-founder of Xviii Games. He has been nominated for the James Tiptree Jr. Award and the 2001 John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer. And he lives in Western Massachusetts. And We at Bain have put out a new book by Jim Cambias. Now at booksellers everywhere is a new novel. It's called Arkad's World, and this is something in the classic just science fiction adventure realm. That's really a wonderful quest novel. So, Jim, tell us a little bit about maybe the genesis of the book. Before we get into the book itself, maybe you can give us an idea of why you decided how this came to you.
Well, it came to me because I felt like there weren't enough boys' adventure novels being written in science fiction anymore. It's always been a way that people have dismissed science fiction, saying, "Oh well, it's just boys' adventures." But when we live in a time when one of the main problems in education is getting boys to read, which you can find any number of concerned articles about.
Yeah, sure. I've written a couple.
Exactly, yeah. And so I felt like we're not serving what was originally science fiction's core constituency. So I wanted to step up.
Are you influenced by it sounds like you are, by like the Heinlein Juvies and and Andre Norton's great stories, that sort of thing?
Well, certainly the Heinlein juveniles, yes. I have to confess, I've only read Andre Norton. I think I read the first Andre Norton book I've ever read just last year. I was never a big fan of Norton when I was a boy. I'm not sure why. I know my school library had them. I remember some of the covers, but for whatever reason, I don't think I ever opened one up until I was 52 years old and picked one up in a used bookstore.
Well, this definitely has the feel of a Heinlein juvenile, I'd say. A planet-based one.
Yes,
right.
Well, sort of he was one of my inspirations. Of course, another one was Kim by Rudyard Kipling. That's one of my favorite novels, and it is such a affectionate and glowing portrayal of India as Kipling remembered it from when he was a child growing up there. And so there's definitely a lot of Kim in Arkad's DNA. In fact, there's even a little bit of a very inside joke hidden in Arkad's name, because Arkad, the word actually means friend, and of course in Kipling, one of Kim's nicknames among his acquaintances was "Little Friend of All the World," and so that was in there deliberately.
Yeah, and the sort of society of all sorts of cultures all coming together in a sort of giant marketplace planet kind of deal has that feel as well. That
yes, I was deliberately trying to recreate that feel. And then, of course, there's a lot of Treasure Island in the book as well, a group of people going off on a treasure hunt, and there's some conflicting agendas among the treasure hunters that we don't know about until things start to fall apart. There's, of course, a dash of The Jungle Book, also by Kipling, because Arkad can communicate with all of the different alien species inhabiting the planet Yavusa, whereas his human companions can't for the most part. So in a way, it's not unlike Mowgli talking with all the people of the jungle, as he calls them in the Jungle Books, the different species.
Yeah, now that you talk about it, I could see a lot of Kipling in this. So, I guess, should we talk about the world first and then about Arkad's character? Or would you like to dive in and talk about Arkad himself? The planet's called Yavusa, and the city that we find Arkad in is Ayaviz. And it just, it's like this crowded sort of Moss Easley tavern of a place with just every sort of alien you can imagine, right? What's going on here?
Well, yes, and partly it was simply that I really love that kind of setting in science fiction. I was 11 or 12 years old when the original Star Wars came out, and that cantina scene, was just so awesome. I also have to confess I had sort of I enjoy creating aliens, and I enjoy writing them, and people tell me I'm good at it, so I decided to play to my strength in this book. So, all right, people like my aliens? Fine, here's a whole bunch of my aliens.
Well, we could talk about some of the alien species in maybe a moment. It's a highly populated place. It is a tidally locked planet, right?
Right. It turns one face perpetually to its sun, so that as the city where the plot begins is right on the Terminator line, so that the sun is, I think I describe it as being perpetually a red dome on the horizon, and it's there because it has access to the permanent ice cap on the dark side of the planet, and so it's also the spaceport. So that city is the interface between the planet and the populated galaxy, so that's where the newcomer, the humans who have come to Xviii arrive, and that's where Arkad finds them.
What is this thing that is circling the city? That was kind of cool.
Well, that was just something I came up with to show that it's not a ruin, that wherever the ancient machines are, and later in the book there's a bit more revealed about them, which I won't spoil, but whatever the ancient machines are that built this place and still underlie it are still active, that this is not some ancient remnants, but the city is not overwhelmed by ice because there are big machines constantly melting the ice away. And also it just gave me a nice image, nice vivid image for the first scene of the story.
And the inhabitants don't necessarily know what's going on. They came after the substrate was sort of laid down by a earlier.
Correct. The inhabitants of Xviii mostly don't really seem to care even. They live there, and if there's stuff going on that they're unaware of, they don't really. It doesn't really bother them. My idea is that this planet winds up being a place where exiles go, so that at least a couple of the species inhabiting it are species whose homeworlds have been occupied, or in one case it's a dissident group that has fled a powerful interstellar empire, and so the humans whose homeworld, the Earth, has also been conquered by that aggressive empire, sort of fit in there, and that way also there's no authority. There's nobody to get in the way, to interfere with all of the pirates and bandits and con men and whatnot that stand in the way of our heroes getting to the lost spaceship they're looking for. Because of course, in a well-run, civilized, orderly society, you can't run away from pirates.
Yeah. And the ship would already be.
Yes, and some competent person would have come along and salvaged the lost spaceship, and that would be that.
Yeah. So it's a cool sort of chaotic and somewhat. Here, it also reminded me a lot of Jack Vance's world. So it has a sort of.
Yes, guilty as charged. I'm a huge Vance fan, based on his Planet of Adventure series. I wrote that for Jackson Games.
Some of your alien dialogue really reminded me of Vance's as well.
Well, Vance often puts very elevated, highfalutin speech in the mouths of his characters, and some of that I echoed some of that. Although the main language that the reader encounters the inhabitants of Siavusa speaking is actually a pidgin, and I was careful to make it literally all words of one syllable. So you get talk like this, which is all short words. And then there's a species called the Ituti, who are they're similar to birds, although they're furry, and they have a very elaborate and sort of formalized way of speaking, where every excellent noun deserves an appropriate adjective, and that I actually was sort of inspired by ancient Greek epics, where every all the characters get a sobriquet, so it's wily Odysseus or brave Hector or whatever. So I decided, here's a civilization where everything gets a sobriquet, and you can have fun with changing up the sobriquet depending on your mood and what's going on.
Yeah, it's there's some great stuff in here. I love. I was going to bring this up in a bit, but there's a particular exchange where Arkad's friend is talking about a girl, Itu, who he's courting, and he says, "Lovely Atet has jealous suitors who resent handsome Taitu's romantic success." He's also talking about himself in the third person.
Ituti don't use pronouns.
And Arkad replies, "Perhaps cautious Taitu should seek a willing female who does not have so many dangerous suitors." So there's I love that adjective noun combination that the Ituti use. It's a wonderful evocation both of the way that they look and because they're bird-like, and that seems like the way birds might talk, especially like birds with a lot of plumage, pretty plumage.
Yeah, the male Ituti all have red and orange stripes and bright colors, and that's part of displaying them as part of their how they court.
Well, let's talk about Arkad. Tell us about our hero, our main character. When we meet him, he's a kid. He's a dirty kid with a blanket covering him.
And a bunch of layers of plastic on his feet. I had some discussion with some people in my writing workshop about Arkad's personality, because they felt that at least one person suggested that maybe he should be a little more, damaged seeming, because he's sort of grown up, completely on his own on the streets. And I stayed away from that, partly because I thought that if he wasn't the kind of person who can bounce back from almost anything, he'd be dead by now in the story. That for him to be a survivor, he has to have a survivor personality, which means he has to be, pretty emotionally sturdy and resourceful. So Arkad is very sturdy and resourceful. He is not the sort of person to give up on anything, and he's constantly, very aware of his situation all the time. He has survived partly by being aware of everything around him. There's a scene I put in at one point where he is, encountering humans for the first time and is reading them the way that one, reads people. And then he realizes that for the first time practically in his life, he's with people who can read him back. That they can also tell what he is thinking and feeling just by looking at him, which most of the other species on Siavusa, don't bother with, because there's only one Arkad on the planet. So why would they bother?
Yeah, he's at one point worried because he's attracted to one of these humans, and he's never had to hide his attraction before.
Yes, he has a little some embarrassing moments there, but and of course that's another element, is that yes, there is a love story, ultimately a slightly tragic love story in this book, but
yeah. Well, let's maybe set up the aliens a little bit more before we talk about the humans that Arkad encounters. Let's talk about Arkad's background. So he does remember his mother, but he has grown up. He's grown up an orphan, but he does have a memory of his mother, and he has a sort of aid that helps him, right?
Yes, he has essentially an e-book reader. Although I assumed it's a bit more durable, being made for infants to withstand toddlers and infants, and it's made in the shape of a toy owl, so it's called Wall, which is a very obscure tip of the hat to A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh books. In the frontispiece, the end pages of the collected Winnie the Pooh stories, there's signatures by all of the characters, and Owl signs his name Wall, because one of the running jokes in Winnie the Pooh, of course, is that Owl is not very wise at all and doesn't actually know how to read. So anyway, Wall is Arkad's book, and it's got, well, among other things, most of the classics of children's literature for the past 2 centuries in it, so that, that's a lot of what Arkad knows about human society is based on books and stories. And that's sort of one of the themes of the book, after all, is that, that's one of the things that's important. Serving the continuity of human experience.
Yeah, at one point he asks the other humans if animals actually talk, because they seem to do it in the books. He wasn't sure. He didn't think so.
They've got talking animals in them, and he's grown up on a planet with a lot of talking non-humans. So, maybe. But yes, unfortunately, one of the other characters has to break it to him that while he's seen humans talk to animals, he's never seen the animals talk back.
So what about Arkad's mother, and what does he remember of his past?
Mother was part of the crew of a spacecraft carrying, this isn't really a spoiler, carrying a trove of Earth's cultural treasures, evacuating them in the face of an invasion by an incredibly powerful alien empire, the Elmisthorn. And it reached Siavusa, evading pursuit, and landed there and couldn't really go on. The ship was damaged at some point in transit. So Arkad's mother, he doesn't remember his father, because in my head I know that his father died during the voyage. And his grandfather was the only other member of the crew and died shortly after their arrival. So Arkad has very dim memories of his grandfather. But then he and his mother had to travel away from the ship. So one of the ways that Arkad knows the way to find it is that he's got some old pictures of himself and his mother, or pictures taken by his mother as they traveled. And so he's retracing their route backwards by matching up his appearance in the photos and trying to figure out where they were taken. And so, she she brought him to Siavusa. I'm guessing he would have been about 6 or 7 at that point, before she died. And then the rest of Arkad's life, and I won't tell you how long that's been, has been on his own.
Arkad's mother and Arkad in the ship, they weren't on a pleasure voyage when they crashed on this planet. They weren't on an exploration either. They were fleeing something. Tell us what happened to Earth. I don't think this is a spoiler either, because this is part of the reason the humans show up in the first few chapters.
Right. Earth has been conquered by a civilization called the Family of Species, which is dominated by this one species called the Elmisthorn. And they are conquering other intelligent life, partly for their own aggrandizement. But their ostensible reason, their stated purpose that they believe is their altruistic mission is they are trying to unite organic life, biological creatures, against the threat of the very powerful machine civilizations, which also exist in that future. And so that is, it's made fairly obvious in the novel that that's at least a self-serving delusion or pretext more than anything, and that the Elmosthorn are mostly just old garden variety imperialists.
Explain how their little caste system works. If that was a very interesting sort of creation there.
Right. Well, I based the Elmosthorn sort of on a somewhat more extreme version of the reproductive dynamics of a pack species on Earth, like wolves, say. Because in wolves, right, you have the alpha pair, or the highest status ones, and their offspring, sort of they and their offspring kind of get first crack at the resources. And I sort of cranked that up to 11, almost more like almost verging on a social insect system where the Elmosthorn alphas, basically they command the loyalty of a group, and pretty much all of that group's efforts are devoted to taking care of the alphas and their offspring. And this is a system that works okay when you're a pre-technological or up to early modern era civilization, but then it goes catastrophically wrong, sort of, for the Elmosthorn when they develop mass communication media. Because all of a sudden, instead of the person you sort of semi-instinctively worship and serve, your alpha is not a relative who you've, grown up in the same community with. It's essentially movie stars. They're a civilization ruled by movie stars, basically. And they are infinitely more desirable and charismatic than your local alphas, so they become these sort of super alphas. And I mentioned that their world wars in the transition era, in the industrial era, were all about essentially which celebrities would be the rulers. So they are organizing their whole empire that way, essentially on a larger scale, where the other species in the family of species are being essentially made to exist in order to serve and adore the Elmosthorn.
Yeah, they're even on conquered Earth. They're even breeding humans to.
Yeah, or genetically modifying. Yeah. And one of the characters in the story has fled Earth, and she is a product of their attempts at genetic modification. Ree Bright is her name, and I tried to pick a name that sounded made up, basically. So she has fled Earth and has been working with the Terran government in exile on another planet as part of their espionage system, and she is one of the backers of this mission, as a matter of fact, because she is able to supply some of the funds to make the whole expedition into search for the lost ship possible.
So tell us about, all right, so Arkad encounters his first humans, and they are looking for this ship. Who are they, and why are they looking for it? What do they hope to gain?
Well, they're looking for it because the ship, the Rosetta, is carrying just an absolute treasure trove of historical and cultural artifacts from Earth. It's, things like the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, various art treasures, the crown jewels of half the monarchies on Earth, contents of museums and things like that. And it's all packed in there, and if that is under the control of the Elmas Thorn, then that sort of would give their control over humans legitimacy, and they can control access to human culture much better. Whereas if it's in the hands of the government in exile, then that sort of lends them legitimacy, and they can preserve Earth's culture unedited by alien hands. And so that's a pretty valuable treasure to be searching for, much better than a bunch of silver.
It's got the Constitution and things like that in there.
Right. Yes. It's the national. It's every country's national archive and crown jewels and National History Museum all stuffed into one spaceship. I mentioned that there were, I think, three ships of that type, and the other two got away, I think. But the Rosetta, that's this one, was lost. So it's a big chunk of humanity's heritage is on board. And so the team looking for it are Jacob Sato, who is a archaeologist, basically a historian. My capsule description of him is Indiana Jones in space. He is looking for the Rosetta, and is sort of the only person who thinks it's possible to find it. Everybody else has more or less written it off as lost. He has gotten Ree to support it, the expedition, and come along as his backer, and also she has valuable skills of her own. And then the third member of that team is a young woman named Baichi, who is unique. She is a cyborg, basically. She is the product of one of the machine civilizations as a failed attempt to create an intermediary between humans and the machine civilization. And she was the only survivor of a whole cohort of them. And the rest of the cohort went bad spectacularly, partly because the machines, of course, really didn't quite understand what they were doing, so they decided, well, instead of having this prolonged childhood, we'll just, educate these beings and force grow them to adulthood in about 5 years. So you have a bunch of 5-year-olds with Superman-level strength and invulnerability, and superhuman intelligence and knowledge, but they're still kind of act like spoiled toddlers, basically, because they have not had any socializing. And so, yes, things go badly. Baichi is the only one who survives, and she is she has sort of vowed to herself that she won't let that happen to her. So she basically is very tightly controlled. Everything she does and says is very, very tightly controlled. And she is she has complete conscious control of her emotional state at all times. Unlike you or me, she can decide whether she is angry or happy or sad or falling in love or whatever, and can prevent it. And so she spends much of the novel making sure that she is not attracted to Arkad.
Yeah. She can also decide whether she needs to breathe or not, and some other.
I figured I was trying to think about what would be a real, plausible but still hard SF superhuman, and so basically she's got little tiny miniaturized, little tiny fusion power plants in all of her cells, So she doesn't need oxygen unless she wants to talk. She doesn't really need food either, except in terms of raw materials when she was growing or something. But so she is incredibly powerful. I worked out that the main limit on her abilities is heat. That when she is doing feats of super strength or whatever, she's going to be throwing off heat like a big truck engine. And so at some point there comes a point where like her skin will be too hot for anyone to approach. And so I figured that would be the only limit on her abilities.
And she's her very this sort of containedness, her decision not to use this great strength is what's so appealing about her, as well as what's frustrating sometimes for Arkad and the others.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're traveling across a dangerous environment with essentially Superman, and yet you still have to deal with bandits and pirates and stuff because she won't take action.
Jacob, our Indiana Jones-ish leader, he is a human. He remembers Earth before the conquest. He's the only person among them that does, right?
Yes, there is an odd disjuncture in time, which I will let the reader find out more about. But yes, Jacob is an older man, and his youth is not that far in our own future, even though the story takes place further down the line. So yes, I wanted Jacob to be a recognizably contemporary human, essentially because he's got to be a foil for all of these exotic characters, a genetically modified human, a cyborg human. So he has to be a fairly baseline human that my readers will recognize. So,
yeah. And he also never forgets what jerks the Elmsthorn are, which is good.
He was a soldier in the War of Conquest. He was a soldier on the losing side of that War of Conquest, so he remembers very vividly.
So what are, give us some idea of the terrain. All right, so they're going on a quest out of the city, across this, I guess they're going along the Terminator. Give us some idea of the terrain and the species that Arkad and the humans might encounter on this quest.
Sure. So they set off from the city Iaviz, and yes, as you say, travel southward along the edge of the Terminator, the Shadowlands, I think I call it, and of course that terrain I envisioned it as being kind of like Scandinavia or New England. It's chilly. There's the permanent shadows of objects fill up with snow. The sun will melt the snow where it touches, but in the shadow of things, there's a cone of snow pointing away from the sun. And that's where a species I call the live. And when we were doing the audiobook version, I told the reader that you're going to hate me when you get to those guys. But they're not native to the planet either, and they are very scholarly. And so Arkad stops off with them first to get some help figuring out where to go based on the photos he has. And then from there they travel out westward. They're always going west towards the center of the day side. And again, that's another little tip of the hat. There's the famous Chinese novel, The Journey to the West, about a group of peculiar characters, including the Monkey King and the Pig Demon, and a dragon in the form of a horse, escorting a Buddhist sage to the west, which in the course of that story means India, but in this they're going a bit further. And so they're making their own journey to the west, and so they travel out partway along this peninsula, where they get involved in the domestic struggles of a group of a family of Ituti who live there, and then they cross the strait to the continent in the center of the Daylands on a sailing boat, which gets intercepted by pirates. The pirates are another species which I rather like. They're called the Pfifu, and they're these tentacled beings. They're these sort of stumpy cylindrical bodies with 4 tentacles on the top and 4 tentacles on the bottom. And they don't really have eyes. They sort of see with their whole skin, but their vision is most acute at the tips of their tentacles. So when they're looking at you, they point a tentacle at you. And they're amphibious. They can swim. They're native to ocean as well as land. So they make pretty good pirates. And they're very creative and artistic. They like to make stuff, and everything they have is elaborately decorated. And so there's a whole long sequence in there where Jacob has this sort of endless discussion with a pirate captain about theories of aesthetics, which I put in. And the Pifu have a fun way of communicating as well. So they speak in the very simple, all short word pigeon tongue, but then they have tentacle gestures, which are very much more florid type of and very heavily metaphorical type of speech.
Yeah. It's sometimes they're undercutting what they've just said even by their gestures. And Arkad's he knows this language.
Yes, he has learned to interpret their gestures. So yes, often what they're gesturing is a very sort of sardonic aside to what they actually say out loud. And they are another species whose homeworld was conquered by the Elmis thorn, partly because they have an absolute inability to unify in large societies at all. Everything they do is done with sort of small groups. I think I mentioned at one point that like the largest partnership they've known is something like a dozen or two people. I think it's 24 individuals. And so they form these sort of family/business partnerships like that, but then they can't really be loyal to any larger organization. So everything else is done essentially on contracts. So, when at one point later on in the story we meet a Psifu who was what we would say basically the Secretary of Defense for his space habitat that he lived in, a space colony. But, instead of running for office or whatever or getting appointed, you put in a bid for the job and you get the contract for a set time.
Yeah. The humans for a time is that the guy they work for to build the machine that will perhaps save the world or not? That is a wonderful. We can't give it away, but just getting to that point in the book, it's a little gem of a chapter. It reminded me somewhat of the like Stanislaw Lem's Siberiad stories. Even it's almost allegorical.
Yeah, there's a little bit. Although I have to say, I'm going to be kind of a spoilsport here. I tend to shy away from actual allegory in my stories. If aliens resemble if things that my aliens are doing, seems to have relevance to contemporary human society, well, that's just a fortunate coincidence. But I try to make the aliens exist on their own terms. They're aliens first.
Yeah, sure. Well, this was more a philosophical point than a point about humans in particular. About the futility of something, I guess. But
well, I also try to make it almost kind of an O. Henry short story. It's like an O. Henry short story written by aliens.
It is. It's great, and it's something that will be a great little nugget for the reader when they get there. So, what? There's pirates. What other dangers will they face?
After they escape the pirates and finish getting onto the mainland, they fall in with a group of mercenary soldiers working for a Xviii. The Xviii are these big sort of like a cross between a snake and a mole. They're big, long-bodied, legless creatures with 4 digging arms at the front, and they dig. They live underground, and they're obsessive builders. and they have this sort of semi-matriarchal society. And the war that the characters get caught up in is an inheritance dispute between two female Xviii, and one of them is trying to reconquer the family stronghold from her sister. And it's kind of implied that her claim is entirely bogus, but she believes it, and she's got some money to hire mercenaries, and that's all that really matters. And so, at one, the humans fall in with them, but try to desert. But Arkad is recaptured, and so he spends part of the book with this, basically a firebomb glued to his head. The leader of the Xviii commander, wants to make sure he doesn't run away again. So she glues this plastic bubble full of incendiary chemical to his forehead, and tells him that at some point it's going to eat through the containment and set his head on fire. So unless he's cooperative, and then she'll give him the solvent to take it off with. And so, we get to see a little bit of warfare on Xviii. It's this interesting mix of things. Some of the soldiers like the Fifu, use things like acid projectors, the devices that spray boiling acid at their opponents, whereas the Xviii, just wear big, sharp Wolverine claws and slash at each other. Hardly anybody uses guns because I set it up so that most of them are kind of nearsighted, like a lot of animals on Earth are. Humans actually have rather good vision. And the other thing is that humans are almost unique in being able to throw things. That's like Arkad's superpower that has allowed him to survive on the streets of an alien city. Is he can hit people 10 yards away accurately. And hardly anybody else can do that, because humans have these big, long throwing arms, and it's something we seem to be legitimately good at, and so that's his alien superpower. And so because of that, most of the species on Xviii anyway come late to the idea of weapons that throw things. So they would probably eventually develop guns or whatever, but for them, fighting is something you do by getting up next to somebody, hitting them or squirting them with something.
Well, it makes for good adventure as well.
Well, I was going to say, there's also economic limits. I mean, the planet has access to some extremely advanced technology through trade, but most of what they can build, because the planet is mostly smallish settlements, they're mostly limited to what you could build in a small settlement. So it's roughly American Civil War level technology, except that they have access to imported, super tech from the machine civilization for some applications.
Now, Arkad, over the course of the book, which one of the cool parts of the book is that he does change, and he becomes more and more of a leader just by testing himself. He becomes more sure of his own ability to deal with problems.
Yeah, well, he's always been, he even at the beginning, he's kind of a confident person, but he's never dealt with other humans before, of course. So yes, initially he's very deferential to them because they're humans from off-world, and he's just a street urchin. But after they've saved him and he's saved them, they're all comrades in arms, and then very late in the book, the group is sort of without a leader for reasons which I won't spoil, and somebody has to step up.
So, well, let's leave it there with the book. What else would you like to say about it that might? I
mean, as I said, I originally envisioned it as it's published as a novel for adults, and there's certainly, I think I included enough levels of story going on that, you know, a younger reader can read it just for what happens next, and an adult can read it for the characters and the speculations about alien societies and whatnot. But I had originally actually tried to pitch it as a suitable anyway for younger readers. So I think it's. I think if you know a bright 12-year-old or whatever, that would be that's sort of who I had in mind when I was writing this book.
Yeah, and the main character is 15 or so, right?
It's for a bright 12-year-old, and then the same bright 12-year-old 20 years later is who this novel is.
Yeah. Well, didn't Heinlein say he was essentially writing science fiction books, the same science fiction books he would write for adults, except that his main characters were just happened to be teenagers in the juveniles?
Kids don't necessarily read stories about kids. Huckleberry Finn was not written as a children's book. Speaking of another bit of the book's DNA.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are you working on now, Jim? What's your current project that you have underway?
Project, which I'm nearly finished with, is a contemporary fantasy novel. It's called The Initiate, and it's I suppose the elevator pitch is something like if Harry Potter was John Wick. It's a man has joined a secretive, powerful organization of magicians in the modern world, real wizards in the modern world, and is trying to destroy them. And so he spends a lot of time being paranoid because if the police learn your name, they can put out an APB on you and freeze your bank account. If wizards learn your name, they can send demons after you. It mostly takes place in and around New York, and so I've been learning a lot about that city. It's nearly done, and I'm hoping to get it to my publisher in the next couple of weeks.
Well, that's very cool. That sounds great. But out right now at booksellers everywhere is Arkad's World, this great science fiction novel by James L. Cambias. Jim, thank you so much for talking to us about Arkad's World today.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. This has been great, and I'm looking forward to hearing the podcast.
Now we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia, Book 1 in the saga of the Forgotten Warrior. After the War of the Gods, the demons were cast out and fell to the world. Mankind was nearly eradicated by the seemingly unstoppable beasts, until the gods sent the great hero Ram Rowan to save them. He united the tribes, gave them magic, and drove the demons into the sea. But as centuries passed, the descendants of the great hero grew in number and power. They became tyrannical and cruel, and their religion nothing but an excuse for greed. The people rose up, and the surviving royalty and their priests were made casteless, condemned to live as untouchables. The age of law had begun. Ashok Vidal has been chosen by a powerful ancient weapon to be its bearer. He is a protector, a member of an ancient military order of roving law enforcers. No one is more merciless in rooting out those who secretly practice the old ways as Ashok. But Ashok isn't who he thinks he is. And when he finds himself on the wrong side of the law, the consequences lead to rebellion, war, and perhaps transformation. Now here is the latest entry in Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword.
Chapter 18. "Where's your cane?" Papka asked. "I threw it in the river," Jagdish answered. He'd be damned if he presented himself to his new assignment looking like a cripple. Besides, his leg only really hurt in the mornings, or when it was too cold, or too hot. or when he walked, or put too much weight on it. He spread his arms so he could see his new uniform. "How do I look?" he asked his new bride. "Like the finest warrior in all of Vidal," she lied. Or perhaps she was still so happy to have been assigned a higher status husband that she actually believed that. To Jagdish, when he looked in the mirror, all he saw was a warrior so pathetic that he'd managed to lose a duel even when his opponent had been unfairly outnumbered and who'd had a Thakur die under his watch as a result. It had taken months for his arm and leg to heal enough to return to duty, but by then the story had spread, and no fighting Paltan wanted him. The finest warrior? I doubt that. You will make an excellent Risolda. Pakpa meant well, but she'd grown up in the worker caste. She couldn't grasp the nuances of rank and assignment within the warrior caste hierarchy. To her, being married off to a miserable failure of a soldier was still a huge step up in life. She didn't understand that his new promotion was really intended as an insult. Only the worst places received names related to water, and he was being sent to Cold Stream. Jagdish kissed his wife. "I must go. I can't be late." He limped from their small home, through the streets of the city, south toward his new assignment, guarding the very bastard who had ruined his life. The fallen protector's appearance had changed. He'd not shaved or cut his hair since the slaughter. His beard was long and unkempt, his hair wild and filthy, and now he truly looked like the casteless dog that he was. Like the other prisoners, he was dressed in grey rags. The only noticeable difference was that sword. "What does he do?" "Nothing much, Risolda Jagdish." The prison guard told him. "We let them out into the yard for most of the afternoon, but he keeps to himself. I think the other prisoners are scared of him. He exercises, sword forms mostly, then runs several laps around the yard. But that's it. When their time is up, we ask him to return to his cell, and he does. Then he just sits there and stares off into nothing." Jagdish stood at the tower railing, looking down into the yard and the prisoners who had segregated themselves into groups. Most of them were here because of crimes not severe enough to warrant execution, but a judge had found them to have temperaments unfit for a period of slavery. His new charges were mostly thieves, debtors, and deserters. The roster said he had a few murderers and rapists from the warrior caste who would serve their time and then be returned to duty, where murder and rape weren't necessarily crimes, as long as they remembered to only do it to their approved enemies and not their own people. He also had some workers guilty of that level of crime who'd not been executed, which told him they came from families with enough money to bribe a judge. Then there were the hostages, warriors taken from other houses in border raids, held here until their families paid a ransom, or they were traded for Vidal men being held in other lands. But none of those mundane prisoners interested Jagdish right now. "Has the prisoner caused any problems?" He had 500 charges, but there was only one who could be called the prisoner. "No, sir. He's unfailingly polite. In fact, Nayak Suchat was surprised by one of the more violent prisoners, who started choking him with a length of chain. Before any of us could get there, Ashok appeared and beheaded the attacker. Cut his head right off like it was nothing. Then he just walked back to his cell. Saved Suchat's life, more than likely. Yes, I'm sure they call him the Black Heart because it overflows with mercy." "I wouldn't say that, Risolda. It wasn't mercy so much as annoyance. He told the prisoners that were watching that he wouldn't abide anyone breaking the law in his presence. Scared them, that's for sure. Assaults have been down, and we've not had a single riot since he's been here. We used to have fights between the different hostage gangs all the time, but now they're all scared of getting on his bad side. Most of the prisoners seem happy, having a bit of entertainment." "The law didn't condemn them here to be happy, Nayak." Jagdish said. Not that he particularly cared about the nuances of the law. He just wanted to fulfill this dead-end detail until a proper war started, because then his value as a border scout would far outweigh his reputation as a lousy personal guard. What do you mean, entertainment? The duels, sir? Wait. You've not been told about the duels? I'm a soldier. Nobody ever tells me anything. What duels? Chief Judge Harter's orders. Anyone who wishes to try and take the magic sword is allowed to duel the prisoner for it. We're required to let them fight. They show up at all times. Not just warriors, but Harter even said to allow workers. Maybe he thinks somebody will get lucky, or the sword will find somebody it likes better. Hell, he's even let other men from other houses have a shot. Said if an outsider won, they'd be given a Vidal obligation and promoted to the first caste. That reeked of desperation. But a promotion to the highest status was a rare thing indeed. Jagdish watched the prisoner, who had found a lip of rock on the perimeter wall and was doing chin-ups with his fingertips. How many has he beaten? I don't know. But probably every fool crazy enough to try and earn himself a better place in the entire region. So far, he's been here 6 months, so 45, maybe 50. I'd have to check the guest log at the gatehouse. I'm surprised you haven't heard. I've been preoccupied lately. We've even had a problem with spectators bribing guards to come inside so they can watch. That's what got our last Risolda transferred. The judges must have not liked that one of us thought of a way to take bribes for something before they could. He trailed off when Jagdish didn't laugh. That nonsense ends. This is a prison, not a circus. Well, it's been like we've had our own personal arena and the prison has a champion gladiator. This must be how the first caste live in the capital, the guard said with a wistful tone. How many of these challengers has the prisoner killed? Not more than 10 or 12, I think. It looks like he tries to let them live. Most he soundly beats. Then he gives them a lecture about how to fight better before sending them on their way. Them who piss him off, though, they go into the furnace in parts. The Black Heart doesn't strike me as the patient sort, but he's got a particular sort of honour to him. The fact that one of his guards seemed so impressed by the prisoner annoyed Jagdish to no end. Only the lowest of his caste were given this assignment. There was never any chance for glory, but plenty of opportunity for failure. If they fulfilled their duty, none of their betters would ever notice, but if one of their prisoners escaped or killed a guard, there would be plenty of shame. The prison guards didn't get to do the things a warrior was born to do, so it was no surprise they would be impressed by a fighter of Blackheart's skill. I want to speak to him. You sure that's a good idea, sir? I mean, I heard you were there that night. Tomorrow, after exercise. Send the rest back to their cells, but have the prisoner stay in the yard. I will meet him alone. That night, Jagdish lay in bed beside Pakpa, thinking about what he was going to do the next day. Most would say it was foolish, but as a proud warrior, he couldn't let such an opportunity pass. Low-born, without any connections, the only other way he could rise in status was to become a war hero. A duel made perfect sense, except for that whole dying part.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Jedkowitz. And the buzzing of wings in an alien planetary hive as it strives to cool down the excitement generated by the Queen reading a bunch of Bane books, lest it result in an explosion and all those cute larvae frying in the sun. Plus, thanks, praise, and huzzahs for James L. Cambias, author of Arkad's World. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.